Hamas is there carrying out executions, beating up Palestinians inside hospitals. And what is the world going to do? Where is Lula? Asking Hamas to release the hostages. Where is Greta? Asking Hamas to release these people in Gaza, these Palestinians. The news, the headline is clear, right? Hamas is beating and executing Palestinians inside hospitals. But who is going to stop Hamas, in your opinion? Who is able to stop Hamas? Yeah, and then you'll see the narrative, right? If the war resumes, you'll see the narrative of what's happening in Gaza, right? Only if a coalition intervenes and wipes out Hamas, eradicating them from the face of Gaza. Yeah, let's see who has the courage to do that, because anyone who acts against Hamas will be labeled with those words, right? Yeah, inside the Gaza Strip, look, they're killing women, they're killing children. But why aren't they saying that now? Because Hamas is doing that now against its own citizens. They're killing women, children, men, they're killing everyone. But nobody talks about that, nobody shouts about that in the streets. The protests in the United States and Europe have ended. The protests at Brazilian universities have ended. Yeah, where are they? Where is the demand for Hamas to stop? Exactly. Adriano Silva said it right. They're gonna talk about genocide. Anyone who goes in and starts a war against Hamas will be called a genocide. So, who wants to take that on? Who wants to be under the world spotlight with that label, right? So, that's it. Everything is at stake right now in the Middle East. All right, guys? Well, and then Trump made some of those statements, right? Middle Eastern allies ready to bring Hamas into line. A threat from Donald Trump, but in a context where the countries are afraid to take on this responsibility. Take a look. President Trump stated that Middle Eastern countries have expressed their interest in entering Gaza militarily to bring Hamas into line. He said this in a post on his social network. Several of our now great allies from the Middle East and the areas around the Middle East have informed me, explicitly and emphatically, with great enthusiasm, that they would welcome the opportunity, at my request, to enter Gaza with a large force to straighten out our Hamas. That's strange, isn't it? It could be my translation here. If Hamas continues to misbehave, violating its agreement with us. And that's what's happening right now. I told those countries in Israel, yeah, not yet. Look at that, not yet. What's the strategy behind this not yet? Even though we are already seeing that Hamas is breaking the ceasefire, violating the ceasefire, even attacking the Israel Defense Forces. Israel is being attacked. Israel is being drawn into war. What is the strategy behind this? Who dares to say what that strategy would be? Well, there is still hope that Hamas will do what is right. If they don't, the end of Hamas will be swift, furious, and brutal. I would like to thank all the countries that have asked for help, he added. Trump also thanked Indonesia for all the help they have shown and given to the Middle East and the United States. Okay? Well, look at that. And then, in response to this issue with Donald Trump, right, saying and threatening that he's going to end Hamas, but not yet. There are reports from the Arab coalition forces, okay, who are not very confident in facing Hamas, right? Rita says, I'll only believe it when I see it. They fund these groups, right? Qatar funds these groups, right? Joel from Hamilton, Adriano, Rose, let's see, Christiane, welcome everyone. If you just arrived, right now type in the chat. To help the algorithm, okay? Keep typing there. Yeah, look, the New York Times reported earlier on Sunday, it's that the countries that could make up the international peacekeeping force proposed by Trump in Gaza are expressing hesitation. Pay attention to this. Hesitation to send troops out of fear of clashes with Hamas. So, Trump does the, here look, Middle Eastern allies ready to straighten out Hamas. Trump makes this announcement, but the allies are afraid, they're hesitant, exactly for the reasons we've already mentioned here. Who is going to take responsibility for exterminating Hamas? Because Hamas is not going to agree to hand over their weapons, right? There's another line of analysis regarding the Gaza Strip that says the following. Look, it's going to happen. There will be coalition forces inside, Arabs patrolling, providing security, and Hamas will be within those forces. Hamas changes its name, switches uniforms, and becomes part of Gaza's security. In fact, there was a report that Hamas and the Palestinian Authority, Hamas and Fatah, would be willing to form a coalition to govern Gaza and finally declare independence. Declare the sovereignty of a Palestinian state in Gaza. This is also a line that's being considered in Israel. Well, and it's seen as a defeat for Israel to keep Hamas in power in the Gaza Strip. Do you believe that? Well, Netanyahu says that this will never happen. But in practice, we're seeing these winds blowing. And those winds aren't blowing Hamas away. They're keeping Hamas in the Gaza Strip. Right? Negotiators say that a so-so deal is better than no deal at all. Right? But for Israel, any so-so deal means death in the future. It means invasions. Can you imagine Hamas ruling Gaza? Right? Hamas will keep receiving all the money that comes from abroad, right? Money from Qatar, money from the United States, money from the Arab countries. And then, yes, the hesitation is about sending troops because of the fear of clashes with Hamas. And the hesitation about having Hamas armed last week, Saudi Arabia, right, issued warnings to President Trump about Hamas being armed in the Gaza Strip, right? Armed.
Armado.
Saudi Arabia will not be part of a coalition with Hamas armed, with Hamas being part of it, right? Yeah, 2 diplomats told the New York Times that Indonesia, Egypt, Turkey, and Azerbaijan were among the proposed countries. Authorities familiar with the matter say there has been little progress in assembling the force due to a lack of clarity about what the peacekeeping force would do in Gaza. Well, a peacekeeping force would have to make peace. And what does it mean to make peace? To prevent jihadists and radical groups from controlling the Gaza Strip, from building tunnels and using hospitals as command centers. Right? So that they don't become militarized. Similar to what happened with Hamas and with Hezbollah in Lebanon. That's what a peacekeeping force should do, because peace must be maintained. Okay, it's different from what the UN did, right? The UN was in Lebanon, the UN was in the Gaza Strip, and it allowed Hamas and Hezbollah to build and grow militarily in those countries. Getting to the point where we are now, right? Where they would then attack Israel. The countries should contribute. But they reportedly said in private that they wouldn't send troops until there was more clarity about whether or not they would need to fight Hamas while it was still armed. Nobody wants to, right? Yeah, Egypt should deal with the International Stabilization Force in the Palestinian enclave. The report says the American government wants the Gaza Strip Stabilization Force to be similar to Haiti's peacekeeping force. And the United States supposedly wants the support of the UN without a full UN armed force. Yeah, every hour it's a different narrative and it just becomes a mess, right? Trump's statement comes after Hamas said it would release the remains of 2 Israeli hostages at 9 p.m. this Tuesday. Trump stated on Monday that he believed rogue elements, not the Hamas leadership, were responsible for the latest attack on Israeli troops. That the leadership was the only option. The leadership is not involved in this. Yes, the only option is war. The Hamas leadership, in any case, this will be dealt with firmly, but appropriately. So there's some confusion. Is it, or is that exactly what they want everyone to think, right? That nobody knows what's going to happen because something bigger is going on. Is that so? Do you believe that? It's a problem, right? Trump isn't the kind of man to act just to leave everything at square one. I also want to count on that, right? I want to count on that too. As Anilda, I don't understand why Hamas is the minority and it seems like they're winning. I don't get it. Here's the thing. Hamas uses the civilians of Gaza as hostages, right? Hamas has already won. If you don't know, Hamas has already won, right? They dragged Israel into a war, kept the war going for 2 years. Just look at that, right? Hamas, it remains alive in the Gaza Strip. He only agreed to return the hostages because he was about to be wiped out and Gaza was about to be completely taken over by Israel. And then it would be very difficult, right, for Hamas to return. So, he agreed. Before that could happen, a ceasefire, and now Hamas buys time. Right? He's buying time. There are still bodies of Israeli hostages inside Gaza. So yeah, Hamas still has something to fulfill. And the next phase is to lay down their arms. And that's when we'll have two things, guys. Either a war with Israel marching in and completely disarming Hamas through war, or Hamas changes its name. Changes its appearance, as we say, and calls itself something else and keeps providing security, right? In Gaza, influencing, commanding, and they pretend to change and we pretend to believe it. That's one line. It's the worst of all of them, but it's on the radar. There are already movements starting in Israel precisely because of this possibility. And it does exist. Truly. Okay, what do you think about that? Let's go. Roberto Mello. Israel is putting its power in the hands of the United States. That's unacceptable. It's ridiculous, says Roberto. Thank you for the super chat, Roberto. Look, I also agree with you. If that's happening, it didn't make any sense to lose these 2 years of war, right? Losing Israeli lives just to, in the end, keep Hamas. Exactly as it was. In the Gaza Strip, right? Or is there a bigger strategy? And I want to believe in that second option. There is a bigger strategy to expose Hamas to the world now and then eliminate it completely. Because Hamas, at the same time that it's going with this let's see if it works attitude, right? Hamas is also being exposed to the whole world. How? Well, the whole world knows that Hamas is exterminating its own citizens in Gaza. So, who is going to decide? Who will stop them? An international force, whether it's Israel or the Arab countries, which I think is very difficult. Which Arab country would want to fight against Hamas? So, that's the justification for the continuation of this war. What do you think, Roberto? Comment on that.